Rambam, Per Chamishi, Halacha Aleph. So he began by saying it's within the human being's power. He says, Kol Adam, not only the Jew. Every person has the ability to be a tzaddik. He has the path, the proper path available, and he has the negative path available to be a Rasha. He says, where do we find it in the Torah? Ushakosu b'Torah hein ha'odam heya kechod bimenu l'das tov v'ro. Behold, man will be like one of us, knowing good and evil. Klomar, what do those words mean? The Rambam speaking. Hey min zeh shel ha'odam hayochid ba'olam. There's one species, the human beings, a very unique species. No other species exists in the world as this species. And within this context, there's no other species that's at any comparison to this species. He himself, through his own initiative, his own perspective, and his own mindset, Yodea Tov v'Ara. He's aware of good and evil. He's aware of each one. And he does anything he pleases. Meaning he's not controlled by instinct, but he has a choice to go in either direction. And nobody could interfere to prevent him from doing good or evil. But of course, everybody's on his own level. Meaning, everybody has different parameters of choice. A person's on a desert island all by himself. It's within his ability to take initiative, good or bad, evil. You know, how much evil could he do on a desert island? He's all by himself. But within that context of his situation, whatever evil he could do that evil, and nobody could stop him. We live in society, we have a greater range. I'll give you an example. You know, at one time, only certain people had certain material available to them. One time, you know, in the 50s, if you drove a Cadillac, you were a rich man. Then the things changed. People became more affluent. You didn't have to be a rich man. You could afford that kind of car. Before credit cards, if you had the means, you purchased. You didn't have the means, you didn't purchase. But because of societal change, the credit system and the standard of living and affluence, the broadness, the parameter of choice have widened. Law and order, the way at one time was in the world, the United States, an ordinary citizen, couldn't come upon a weapon. Only had to be the underworld. They had weapons. But anybody who was not part of that realm of society had no relevance to weapons. Even though people would have in their vernacular, I'm angry, I would want to kill that person. It was only an expression. Didn't mean in reality. Today, it's a whole different reality. People mean what they say, and they act on it. So what at one time, lifespan was 60 years old, 50 years old. For antibiotic, for modern medicine, person came down with pneumonia, he didn't live. Person didn't live long enough even to contract cancer, unless it was something unusual. Heart attack, people died of a heart attack as young people. All of a sudden now, modern medicine, we can contend with many of these things. Things have changed. Why? Because God wants people to live longer. That's the answer. So the parameters and the extent of choice have broadened and have extended. Person lives longer, he can exercise that choice over many more years. The availability of choices due to affluence, due to societal changes, due to many things, due that there's no longer law and order compared to what it used to be. People don't believe in God the way they used to believe in God. Even as a non-Jew, there's no fear of anything. The whole concept of conscience has literally almost faded out. But this is all the parameters of choice that Hashem gives the human being. You can do whatever you want. It's up to you. and nobody could stop you. Of course, there'll be consequences. But initially, when the person perpetrates that wrong, he could perpetrate it. There may be a consequence, but initially, he has that ability. The cave on chicane, and because that's the reality, that he could do something and nobody could stop him, Pen Yishlach Yodos, it is concerned, he may take from the tree of life. And if he takes the tree of life, that means he's going to be eternal. So you have a person eternally who has this ability to do things and you can't stop him. And there's not going to be any consequences. Therefore, that's why Adam was driven from the Garden of Eden for this reason. That available of eternity has no relevance to evil. Evil will come to an end. So now he's outside of the Garden of Eden. He still has choice. Hashem destroyed the world after 10 generations with the great flood. He has choice. The Romans were barbarians. They had choice. They chose to be barbarians. Esav chose to be Esav. Although he's inclined to be that, but he had the ability to rein in on himself. Mm-hmm. That's what it's about. You have a good person, a Jew, and he has his own value system. It's not rooted in religion. He meets somebody who's a traditional Jew who has Masorah. He says to him, I think you should accept and take upon yourself more religious practices. Rabbi, don't tell me how to live my life. I'm a humanitarian, I'm a good person, I'm ethical, I'm moral. I'll make my own choices. Nobody's going to tell me what kind of choice to make. You're welcome to whatever you want. Again, nobody could stop him. You want to put on tefillin and you want to do this, you do whatever you want. I'm talking within the realm of Judaism. You want to be dishonest, ultimate, you'll be caught. Maybe, maybe not. That's your choice. Many people live their lives as that. You're wasting your life. You're whittling away your life. Just wasting your time. That time is invaluable. You do so many good things with that time. Don't tell me how to live my life. Man has the ability to take his own initiative, good or bad. It doesn't make a difference. That's the uniqueness of the human species. Any species other than human being, the porpoise and the chimpanzee, among animals or mammals, are the highest functioning. They have the greatest degree of intelligence, but it's rooted in something else. But that intelligence is what? That's part of their DNA. That's their function. Like an ant naturally is the most zealous and insect. It works with alacrity, whatever it does. And that's the model that we're supposed to learn from. We're supposed to learn Zrizus. The Otzel, Shlomo says, Lecha le'omel el anemono otzel, learn from the ways of the ant. Or the Gemara tells us, you learn modesty from a cat. The way a cat relieves itself, does it with a great degree of modesty. This is, a human being should learn this from them. No, the Chovos HaLevavos writes, why did God create a human being with bodily functions? Could have created a person without, if time is so valuable, he could have created a person that you relieve yourself once a year, once a month. Person day in and day out has to be busy with his bodily functions on many levels. Why? That's to humble the person. The person should understand we share many things with the animal. Just as the animal relieves itself, it defecates, we also. You're a higher level of animal, you have intelligence. But in terms of your needs, you're no different than the animal. So let me ask you a question. A person lives in a urban society and he only sees human animals. And he doesn't see this. So he doesn't see the equality between him and the animal. If you lived at one time, you live in a world that you saw animals, you saw species. You lived on a farm, you lived in a forest, you saw it. But people never, certain children, they're raised until they go to the zoo. They never saw an animal. The Mechaber rules that when you see an unusual species, you say a bracha, B'shana Brios. And the Gemara says in the Shulchan Aruch rules that if you see an elephant or a monkey, you say B'shana Brios, because at one time people did not see these species. Whoever saw an elephant? If you went to a circus, you saw an elephant, and before the circus, you never saw the elephant. And where did you see? Where did you see an ape, a gorilla, or a monkey? You didn't see it. So the Mechaber rules, it's a Gemara, that if you see a monkey, you say a bracha B'shana Brios. I mean, that's how shielded they were from that. So if that's the case, where do you draw this lesson that you should be more modest? So every society has its blind spots. So the human being is unique in this matter. So it's interesting because the Rambam says in Hilchos Deos that there's no species more impressionable than the human being. If you put a human being in a positive society and he has positive role models, he will be influenced positively. That same person, you put him in a negative society where people act unethically, immorally, and do terrible things, that person ultimately will be affected by that. So therefore, Rambam says, if you find yourself in a society which is corrupt, you should leave that society and live among good people. What about if you can't find such a society? Wherever you turn, the world is corrupted. Even if you have to go into the desert, not to be exposed, you should go to the desert. Because since the human being is so impressionable, every other species, whatever it is, that's what it is, regardless where you put it. But a human being, it's something very positive. So a person could exercise his power of choice by, if you want to do the right thing, say, but I'm drowning. You find yourself into the ocean, it's irrelevant how well you swim. The person drowns. But we have a choice. You could extricate yourself from one location, one society, put yourself in another society. That is the value of choice. We find Lot, Avram's nephew, became phenomenally wealthy because he was with his uncle. When his uncle went to Egypt, Avram came back with tremendous wealth, and Lot came back with tremendous wealth. Once Lot had that wealth, and he felt that he could exercise his own muscle, so to call, he could flaunt his own position, he says to his uncle, don't tell me how to live my life. I want nothing to do with you. I want nothing to do with your God. And where does he go? What kind of society does he choose? He chooses Sodom. This is the lowest people who understand there is a God, but they defy him. They're evil. They were the personification of evil. After having a role model like Avram, that's where you choose to go. But I don't want to be restricted. I want to do what I want to do. Okay. But that he had choice. When he was Avram, he didn't sin. But the moment he had that level of independence, he's out of the gate. To where? Where's he going? Going to a location which is the antithesis of whatever Avram represents. Proof of the pudding, look what happened at the end. God had to send an angel to save him, that he shouldn't be destroyed with Sodom. At Sodom, what happened to Sodom? What he valued, his wealth, all the wealth that he had, that he and the shepherds of Avram, they fought over. At the end, there was no wealth. It was literally destroyed, cosmic destruction. There's not a trace of that society. That's the Dead Sea area. It's like Death Valley. That's what it is. Technically, a parent has an obligation that the child reaches a certain age, or the child has really no intelligence, no understanding. When the child begins speaking, the first thing you teach him, two psukim. Torah tziv lanu Moshe Moshe Kilas Yaakov. And the second verse, you teach him, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The child has no understanding what those words mean. But you understand, a human being is impressionable, whether you understand or not. Exposed to something and you establish a certain routine, it leaves an indelible impression on that person. And as the child develops, physically, mentally, emotionally, a parent has an obligation to gradually draw the child into a certain type of behavior. Doing mitzvahs, although a minor has no obligation. But rabbinically, a father, a parent has an obligation to train and condition the child to behave as a Jew as he's obligated as an adult. But what's all this about? If the human being is the most impressionable creature walking the face of the earth, there's no other species like this. And this species has free choice. And this free choice will be exercised someday. And there'll be liability for that choice. And there'll be reward for that choice. So by the parent initially creating that positive environment for the child in every aspect of his life, what do we say? Is your language more refined? Certain parents that, the child's 5 years old, and he's using, the word doesn't exist today, profane language. When was the last time you heard the word profane? Profane language. And the friends of the father, they start laughing. He's a chip off the old block. He's already, where did he hear it? He heard his father speaking this way, so he speaks the same way. That's how impressionable a child is. He doesn't even know what the words mean. Doesn't make a difference. So if a parent or parents are a positive influence and they create a positive environment, being that unique species, that there's no more impressionable species like the human species, what service are you offering for your child? You're making the difference in the future, whether it's going to be pushing a boulder up a mountain or it's going to come natural to that child. Many things are going to be natural. He doesn't have to fight his demons. Of course, he still has choice, but the choice is an easy choice because he was in that environment which the parents chose for him, education-wise, home-wise, vacation-wise, wherever you take the child, you only allow him to be exposed to things which are positive. Say, I'm parents, and I've had this in the past. I want to give my child free choice. I don't want to set him on a path that he has no choice later in life because I've chosen his path of life. When he'll be a teenager, he'll be a young adult to make his choices. As a child, I don't want. Therefore, let him be exposed to everything and he'll make a choice. But that parent doesn't understand exposing him to certain things in life earlier, it becomes indelibly imprinted. The negative becomes indelibly imprinted. Then later in life, it minimizes his choice to a great degree. Actually, you've actually handicapped your child. Because since a human being is so impressionable, by allowing him to be exposed, what he eats, what he drinks, what he speaks, what he sees, and what he experiences, and the people who are his role models, if they're negative role models, it's disastrous. Well, I let him make his own choice. You don't say you're minimizing his choice. You're taking away his choice. Like I say, to give up Judaism takes 1 second. To acquire it, it's a lifetime. That's what it is. So you say, but what kind of choice? What's the value? If I've already made such an indelible positive impression, so what's the value of his choice? You know what the value of choice is? As I said, the person does mitzvahs, but he does them by rote. He does them with ulterior motives. So that's your parameters of choice. Do I do it for acknowledgement? Do I do it for financial gain? Do I do it by rote without even thinking what I'm doing, just go through the motions? Or do I rein in on myself not to be distracted? And it's called qualitative Judaism, not just passé Judaism. It's a whole different reality. So you don't have to worry that you're taking away your child's choice. If your child is always, you teach your child to be ethical and moral, not to steal, not to hurt other people as a child. Why? Let him do what he wants. And when become an adult, he'll understand wrong is wrong and right is right. No. Once a human being is able to rationalize anything, and you could justify anything because of your conflicts of interest, therefore it's crucial and essential to set that child on a straight and narrow path, because he could always go off that path. But once he's not on the path, to find that path, it's like, as I said, it's monumental accomplishments every step of the way. Finds himself in the ocean. As well as you swim, there's no way to survive. What happens if you have a rescue boat coming and they throw out a lifeline? As much as the current is pulling the person, if you could hold on tight enough, you could be pulled out of the brink. What about the current is so strong it's being torn away? What about if they throw something, a life jacket, that as much as the current is, you don't have to even hold on. Somebody's pulling you. You're being pulled up. Right? Larry, that's what this class is all about. Regardless of the background, your past, and all the levels of exposure, which, as I said, which were very, very indelibly negative, because it didn't represent what we're talking about now, doesn't make a difference. Every little bit, we're chipping away at it. And as much as we chip away, if you come on again every day, you're holding on to us and we're holding on to you. And that's what it's all about. And this is choices. So the only choice you have is, do I get on from 12 to 12:45 every day? Do I get at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 to 10 Sunday? That's your choice. Once you're here, we're holding on to you and you're holding on to us. And if you're a smart guy and you understand that the concepts are not archaic and they're very rational and very down to earth and very reality, then you buy into it. But even if you buy into it, but bad habits are not great. You go back, okay, but as long as you're involved at some degree, you inch your way up, and eventually, you develop other habits, as the Rambam says. We're born with certain predilections, but you could create a second nature by conditioning. You condition yourself to do different things differently, because once you get into the act and you repeat it many times, eventually it becomes second nature. Those were the words of the Rambam. It's called patterning. Person, God forbid, has a stroke. And then the person that doesn't have usage of his hand or parts of his body. So the physical therapist may be very painful, but through therapy, the brain is repatterned. And that's the way the human being functions. Everything's patterning in the physical sense and the spiritual sense. It could be negative, it could be positive. We mentioned, Shlomo Melech says, King Solomon says in Proverbs, Zecher tzaddik livrocha, that when you mention a tzaddik, it should always be in the context of a blessing. Shem Rishon Yirkov. When you mention an evil person, the name of the evil should rot. Therefore, because of the representation of what a Rosh is, we don't want that representation. People should be exposed to that representation. And because, as we're saying, it should disintegrate. There shouldn't be a trace of it. So when we mention it, we mention the most negative way that people should stay away from that. Because as we're saying, since a human being is so impressionable, and there's no other species that exists as impressionable as us, and we have choice. So we want to create the best context of choice, setting for choice, that you're not impressed negatively, because then you're fighting your own demons. Then it's a struggle. The struggle is much more difficult because you have that level of influence. So therefore, we try to cleanse the playing field, to minimize the negative of the playing field and enhance the positive, the advantages. Zecher tzaddik livrocha. You mentioned tzaddik, you point out who he is. He's just not a little old man with a black long coat and a hat and a white beard. But what he represents, he has sage wisdom. He represents something which there's nothing comparable to him. Not only on a spiritual level, even on an ethical level. His level of ethics that people can't hold a candle up to what he understands what chesed is, what these things are, only because of his dimension of spirituality. I'm not sure if maybe Larry ordered it. I mentioned it a long time ago. It was published by Feldheim, maybe 50 years ago. There was a person who came from Europe. He was 9 years old. In the earlier part, the end of the 19th century, his name was Joseph Herman. He was 9 years old. And he pulled himself up from his bootstraps. He was a very observant Jew, even though there wasn't much Judaism in New York City at the time, Jewish education. And he chose to become a furrier. He became a wealthy man. And his thing was chesed. At every Shabbos, every day at a Shabbos table every week, could have 30 people. Many of them were single. They didn't have means even to provide for themselves. Many of them were a little off, didn't make a difference. And he would invite him to his house, to his home, give him a meal that they couldn't get anywhere else. And he'd speak about Judaism, inform them just the basic things that they didn't know because they didn't have a Jewish education. And he did this for years. It's his daughter. She married a person, Rabbi Shane. Her name was Ruchama Shane. She wrote the book about her father. It's not written the way a Harvard professor would write a book, but the information there is phenomenal information. It's an inspiration that we have had such Jews that did chesed at this level. So over there's a story when he was an older man, after his wife passed away, he moved to Israel, and before the state became a state in the 40s, and he's living in Meisha Urim, that's the old section of Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. And again, he's a man of means, he buys himself a nice apartment with a large dining room. He has many chairs to invite as many people as he can. And you realize that society was a different society than American society. People, their whole behavior was a different behavior. Relative to what the United States was then to Israel, was people behaved, especially people who were indigents. It was like archaic behavior. Certain basic behavior patterns, the way they would eat, the way they would maintain themselves, many things were difficult to deal with. But because of his level of giving, it didn't deter him and never made a person feel uncomfortable wherever he's coming from. That's the type of person he was. So when he came to Israel, he never wore a long coat. He wore a short jacket. He decided he's an older person now. He's going to buy a frock, which he's going to wear on Shabbos. So he's hosting 20, 30 people at his table. And you could imagine these people never eat meat. And his cholent is meat, right? This is like the stew, meat stew. And the people who are eating there, and some of these people are a little unbalanced. And he's wearing this beautiful kaftan. And one of these unstable people pick up the plate of cholent and throw it at him. Throw at the host. For whatever reason he didn't feel he was being treated well. He threw the plate, and it landed on his brand new first Shabbos he's wearing this, on his kaftan. What would you do? You go berserk. You'd scream. And after he threw it at him, the person tore out of the house because he figured they're gonna lynch him after this.
It's a message you shouldn't wear the frock.
Yeah, that's when you wear the white coat, Alan. Just keep your name off the coat. Dr. Alan Spiegel.
The message.
Okay. So what does he do? Doesn't react like nothing happened. And he says to the other people, it's okay. Don't worry about it, because he felt that the other people would run after him. And he runs down he says, come back. It's okay. Don't worry. You're welcome. You understand? It's almost like at an abnormal level that you're so self-deprecating that who am I? I'm here to serve the other person. And they said he's not stable. He behaved because he attributed his instability. It's not because he's a bad person. If he could see any trace of positiveness in anybody, that's what he saw it. It's worthwhile to read the book. So if you have this kind of person, either you see him as the guy's crazy, whoever puts up with this stuff, he's not really a good role model for many people. So if you're at the table, you say, this is crazy. But if you read about it, the way he was giving, his selflessness for other people and his sensitivity for other people, whether they were stable, unstable, didn't make a difference. If they were needy, he was there to help them. That's the way it was. There was a family in the 20s. They were a very wealthy family, and they were observant. Name was Golding. Golding family, they were in the textile business up in Boston. They came to New York. And this Golding, Rav Chanan Wassim and Zech Tzaddik Livrocha, when he came from Europe before World War II, he stayed in their home. And his wife's name was Necha Golding. Necha is a Yiddish name, Necha, Necha, Necha Golding. And the wife of Mr. Herman, you could imagine how busy she would be before Pesach, preparing that have endless guests at the Seder. And his wife was a role model for this Necha Golding, and she had unlimited amount of money. They were very wealthy. They were in textiles. And Herman lived, the Herman family lived on the Lower East Side. She lived on the Upper West Side. She lived like the equivalent, the apartment was equivalent of like a mansion. Every day, 2-3 weeks before Pesach, she would pull up with her chauffeured black limousine Cadillac, dressed in her, of course, clothing, which indicated she was from the wealthy class. She brought an apron. She went to the kitchen, and she started to peel the potatoes and the vegetables together with Mrs. Herman. And she did whatever she had to do. Could you imagine? You can bring your housekeeper, and you can bring your chef, and you can bring all the help. She did it herself. She came herself. She participated in preparing for the Seder, that she should be able to accommodate all these endless guests to do this chesed. Evidently, his wife was also a role model. If you have positive role models, otherwise it's craziness. But when you see the person, his sincerity and his purity, and you see the effect on the people, how it changes people. It's interesting. My father, Oliver Sholem, was born in 1920. He grew up in very difficult times in the United States, and he was an orphan. He had a very hard life as an orphan. And he lived a life that people took advantage of him whenever they could. And there were many times he had nobody to defend him. He was taken advantage of. And as a result of that, he had a very negative attitude about mankind. Trusting a person because from his experiences, he used to work 12 hours a day when he was 13, 14 years old. And the boss was supposed to pay him $12 for the week. And then after, you don't give him $8 of the salary. Could you imagine? His employer was a rich man. He knows he has nothing. And he's conniving this little kid out of $4. And that was his whole life. He had nothing. He didn't have parents to support him. He was self-supporting. So if you have those kinds of experience over and over and over, how do you see people? So he says, when I see a good person, I'm surprised. That was the exception to the rule. The average person, if you could take advantage, takes advantage. When my father retired, and people remember, he used to come to the lectures. He used to come every single morning to Yad Avram. He used to come, he was already in his upper 60s, early 70s. He would open the door. He was the first one there. Travel from Lower East Side, 63rd Street, and he would interact with the people of Yad Avram. And he said to me, he's never met people like this. He's never met people so positive and wanting to help, and this and that, and more people he met, he was like amazed. He never saw this world before. And gradually, his whole perception of people started to change. All of a sudden, he's having a breath of fresh air within society, because his experience was within a society where he was always a victim. He was victimized continuously. So how do you see the actual average person? He's a victimizer. I've been victimized enough. That's the way it is. Again, so we see the environment is crucial. Your perspective, your attitude, your sensitivities. What are you willing to forego? Though everybody has this breaking point. You can put up things up to a point. And once in a while, you can deal with it, put things in perspective. The world is not perfect. But if all you see is imperfection and you get crushed by it, so how do you see the world? The world is not a pretty world. That's the way it is. Years ago, people used to say, there was an expression in society, my home is my castle. That's it. The person was fortunate, he had a family, and he had a good marriage, and he had children that he prided himself. The world was irrelevant to him. It was irrelevant. That was his innate sense of value. What goes on outside, it's irrelevant. That's the reason why he was able to have a smile on his face.
Yeah.
Soloveitchik, he was the rabbi in Brisk, chief rabbi of Brisk, which was in Belarus. And his father was famous Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. But he himself was leading Torah age. He lost most of his family in Warsaw, and he was able to flee Europe in 1941 with a number of his sons and a daughter. And he was a man, as I said, in Torah, he was almost unequaled in his time. And he lived in Yerushalayim. And he was recognized immediately as soon as he came as one of the leading Torah sages in Israel. And he's world renowned. And people would come and they would consult with him, whether it was in learning or other issues, whatever the issues were. And this person comes to see the great rabbi, the Brisker Rav, and he brings his little boy, 3-4 years old, with him. And he felt it would be inappropriate to bring the boy into the room when he's speaking to the rabbi. So he told his son to play in the outer room. And the rabbi, he had they used to call it a credenza. It was a break front. And he had glasses in there. And as, he's learning, he's speaking to the rabbi, and the father, all he hears, glasses being shattered, smashed. And he figures his son probably is taking glasses out of this break front and smashing the glasses. He can't contain himself. He excuses of a rabbi. He starts screaming at his son. What are you doing? You're not behaving like whatever you want to call, whatever words he used about his son. And he's ready to hit his son, to discipline him. The rabbi comes out with a big smile, very calm. He says, you don't understand. That's what a child's about. He's not behaving differently than any other child would behave. So by hurting him, you're interfering with his development. That's the way a child's supposed to develop. To enjoy doing these things. As he gets older, you teach him not to do it. And he says, okay, glasses can be replaced. But when you damage a child, you can't replace that. It's not replaceable. That's the way, that's what he said to the father.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Rabbi.
You're raised in an observant family. Usually Friday afternoon, in the olden days, was a very hectic time. Why? Sundown is coming, especially in the winter. Things are not really where they should be. The mother wants to make sure everything is in place for the Shabbos. The table is set properly. The candles are. The food, the pots are on the oven, on the stove. We put a blech covering on the fire. And the mother has phonetic energy. And you could feel the tension in the house. And finally, she lights the Shabbos candles and she just plops down and nearly passes out. Okay? Fast forward, next generation, the daughter's a carbon copy of the mother. What goes on Friday afternoon? The same expressions. She'll scream at the kids. We have to get it done. This, just a repeat of the same thing. Alan, have nachas.
Yeah, Yiddish nachas.
Just be patient. Remember that. That's the message.
Yeah,
Okay.
he threw stuff in my suit already.
Okay, good. So again, it's repeat. As a human being, people are very impressionable. We're into habit. We see things. And the way you raise your child becomes a carbon copy of the parent.
Look, there's
Attitude. What attitude?
Look.
The parent is a positive role model. It's a tremendous thing. But if the parent is a negative role model, unintentionally a negative role model. Okay, Alan can't restrain his nachas. Okay, Baruch Hashem. Okay. And I remember, you get married. And, when I was married, my mother-in-law, she was born in the early 20s. It was a different world. And she saw her mother. I remember I said to my wife, Allah Shalom, the way we're going to raise our kids in our home, there has to be a calmness, there has to be a this. And I saw exactly, but all women who came from that era, there was a similar behavior pattern. People lived in cramped quarters, didn't have, the apartments weren't spacious, weren't expansive. You had to live in a home, but they carried that baggage they brought into an expansive home. But now you have no reason to behave that way. You have modern appliances. You can prepare the food a lot. You don't have to do it manually. Everything, put it in the grinder, in the mixer, whatever it is. Everything's a different world. Okay. Now the Rambam says something. Rambam was a doctor. Besides being a Torah sage, a Torah giant of one of a kind. The Rambam writes, where are we here? Rambam writes in Halacha Beis, Al Yavor b'machshavtecha dover zeh, she'omrim tipshei sa'olam. Says, let this not even enter your mind for a moment. The fools of the world, of the nations of the world. Tipish it means foolish, these fools. Doesn't mean a person who's unintelligent. A person who's intelligent and says things which are unintelligent, he's a fool. It's called tipesh. Tipshei sa'olam. V'rov golmei b'nei Yisrael. And the majority of golmei Yisrael, people, unthinking Jews, the majority of unthinking Jews, that God decrees on every human being from the beginning of his life, Leos Tzadik Arosha. It's predestined. You have no choice. He says the fools of the world and the majority of Jews who are unthinking, they believe there's a perception that whether you're a tzaddik or Russia, he was born a tzaddik. He was born to be a Russia. It's all predestined. You have no control. And therefore, there's no liability. The only one you could fault is God. But the person has no control over his behavior, what direction he goes. He says, this is what the fools of the world and the majority of Jews who don't have an understanding, this is what they say. That's their position. Ein adover kain. The Rambam says it's absolutely wrong. That's not fact. It's incorrect. This is the famous Rambam I always quote. Every person can be a tzaddik as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. Could you imagine? Larry, you could be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. When you walk into my house, you may have to put on a mask because your radiance will be so intense, I can't look at you. Right? But he says every tzaddik, including today, you could be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu, or Rosha Kirovim, or to be evil like Yerovam ben Nevat. He's the one who actually took the Jews and converted most of them to idolaters. He took them in that direction because of his ego. These are the extremes. He could be the ultimate Moshe Rabbeinu, or the negative Yerovam ben Nevat. So we always discuss. I mean, who are you fooling? You could be like Moshe Rabbeinu. You think God's going to speak to you in a wake state? See, at least if he speaks in a sleep state, you can sleep till 3 PM because he's speaking to you sleeping. But he has to. He wakes you up. I need my sleep. But you could be like Moshe Rabbeinu. But you realize, although you can be like Moshe Rabbeinu, God's not communicating with you at all. It means in terms of what's accredited to you, in terms of your level of accomplishment, whatever Moshe Rabbeinu, whatever his level of accomplishment was as an individual, you as an individual could be no less accomplished than him in terms of your purpose. As he was purposeful in his context, you could be identically purposeful in your own context. As I always say, you cannot be more than you're meant to be. Every person has a certain potential. If you meet that potential, you can't be more than that. Moshe Rabbeinu, what was his great? He met his potential. So if although it may be infinitesimal to Moshe Rabbeinu's potential, but if you meet that potential, your level of accomplishment is no less than Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what it is. Doesn't mean say you can be as holy as him in terms of prophesizing, and God will come to you and it won't. That's nothing to do with this. In terms of what is your innate value. Your native value is no less than that because you can't be more than you're endowed to be. And therefore, you could be a tzaddik than Moshe Rabbeinu. Tzaddik means you do everything right. But it doesn't compare. We're not comparing. It has nothing to do with it. They have an Olympics for paraplegics, or they have senior citizen Olympics. He made the goal line within 49 hours and 68 seconds. The people running as people in their 20s, they do it in 3 hours. You won the Olympics. Wake up and realize, that they used to say, wake up and die right. You guys are pretty close to the grave. You're going to die right pretty soon. That's an Olympics. For people of that age, or with the handicaps, this is a tremendous accomplishment. They can't do better than that. But within that capacity, they're stars. They're champions. Everybody can be a champion. If you address whatever your abilities are and you maximize them, you're a hero. You're a tzaddik. Ochocham osocho. You could be wise or you could be a fool. As I said before, wise doesn't mean you have an 190 IQ. Whatever intelligent quotient you're endowed with, you could use it in the positive, you could use it and be a fool. O Rachmon o Arzori. A person can be merciful or you can be cruel. Even a person who's naturally merciful, he has a predilection to be merciful. If he chooses to be cruel, he can become a cruel person. And a person, because we said choice, a person has a choice. Once you have choice, even though naturally you're inclined to be insensitive and cruel, you have the ability to overcome that and become merciful and have compassion for your fellow human being. O Kili Oshua, you could be generous or you could be miserly. Every attribute, every characteristic, that negative, positive, you're able to assume the positive or assume the negative. That's within your choice. Nobody is compelling him. Nobody's decreeing that you must behave this way. It's all up to you. You take initiative. Positive, you're fully accredited. Negative, you're culpable because you didn't have to make that choice. No, nothing's drawing you to one more than the other. But of course, everybody has his own capacity. He himself personally, due to his understanding, he veers and is directed to whatever direction he wants to be directed. I remember when I had my first child, and when we have a bris, my son, it's usually done in the Beis Medrash. It's done in a shul. No, years ago, when I was born, the bris was done in the hospital because the mother stayed 8 days in the hospital, and the mother, before she was discharged, the moel would come to the hospital, do a bris, and the mother would take the child home, circumcised by a moel, not by the doctor. But today, after 2 days, 3 days, or 48 hours, the mother's out. So when you have the bris, usually it's done in the shul, and the meal is either in the kiddush room or a ballroom or whatever it is. So we had the bris of my oldest son in the Beis Medrash. This was in Baltimore. He was born in Baltimore, and there was a friend of the family. Maybe he was 20 years old. His hobby was, he was a photographer. So he took pictures, of the actual bris, my Rosh Hashiva, Zichron Livrocha, other people, important people were there for the bris. And then during the meal, the family, and he took about 100 pictures, black and white. They're black and white pictures. Next day, he was very excited that he was able to take the picture. He had a professional camera, and he came from a very wealthy family, so he could afford that expensive photography equipment. Give you the details. Next day, he comes with about 3 thick envelopes of pictures. And I'm sitting and learning in the base medrash. And he says, this is before I was called rabbi. And I'm studying with my chavrusa, my study partner. He says, I have the pictures from the bris. I want to give them to you. So I take the 3 envelopes, and the table we learn it has like a shelf. I take the pictures, put them in. I don't even open it to look at the pictures. I was taken aback. Didn't say a word. He walked away. And I left it. I didn't even open the envelope to look at the pictures. When I was finished learning, and I was taking them home, I opened to see what the pictures looked like. So he called me up later. He says, I don't understand. I took pictures at your son's bris, and it's your first child. How do you not open the envelope and look at the pictures? I said, his name was Frankie. I said, Frankie, I was middle learning. Do you think I'm going to interrupt my learning to open up the envelope to look at those pictures? It could wait. When I finished learning, I took it home. I opened it up. I looked at it. I appreciate very much the pictures, They're beautiful, whatever it is. But what is the natural inclination of a person? You look at it for 2 minutes, then you put it down and you spend more time later. I didn't give it a second glance, put it straight in the table, and that was the end of the story. And the truth was, it wasn't even hard for me. I was so conditioned not to interrupt my studies at that time. Today, maybe it'd be different. If we pictures my grandchildren, great-grandchildren, the bris would be a different story. Maybe I would hesitate to look. I'd have to maybe restrain myself not to look. But then I was so conditioned, not even an inkling of desire even to look. Went straight into the table. That was the end of the story.